What if I told you that one simple gate could bring down an entire homeowners association? That a quiet lakeside engineer could go from sipping coffee on his porch to uncovering embezzlement, conspiracy, and corruption that ran all the way to City Hall? That's exactly what happened to Mike Harris. It started with a lock. It escalated with bolt cutters. And it exploded when a neighborhood queen named Jennifer Wilson, HOA president with pearls and a power complex, decided Mike's property wasn't his anymore. But she picked the wrong guy. This isn't just about weeds, fences, or mailbox colors. It's about how HOA power, when unchecked, can ruin lives, and how one man stood his ground, turned the cameras on, and fought back with the truth. If you've ever dealt with petty HOA politics or dreamed of watching entitled board members get hauled off in handcuffs, you're in the right place. Welcome to Real HOA Drama, where gates close, secrets spill, and justice kicks down the clubhouse door. Subscribe now, because this isn't fiction. It's war behind white picket fences. If Mike Harris had known a simple gate would flip his quiet lakeside life into a live-action courtroom thriller, he probably would have stuck with a hedge. But Mike wasn't the hedge type. He was an engineer, analytical, detail-oriented, and proudly obsessive when it came to personal space. So when he bought the cozy property on Cedar Lake, with a sliver of shoreline tucked behind his backyard, he did what any privacy-loving man with a love for kayaking and clean grass would do. He installed a gate. It wasn't a big, flashy gate. No wrought iron dragons or medieval crests. Just a sturdy, black steel gate with a keypad lock and a clear, private property, no trespassing sign. Simple. Legal. Necessary, after all. The first 3 weekends in his new home had welcomed everything from beer cans and dog poop to 2 teenagers in matching swimsuits using his hammock like it was public property. But on a bright Tuesday afternoon, peace died. The doorbell rang with a kind of authority that made Mike's stomach twitch. He set his coffee down, peeked through the peephole, and there she was, Jennifer Wilson, the president of the Maple Springs HOA, clad in pastel pink, pearls, and power. She wasn't smiling. Mike opened the door with that mix of polite dread and Midwestern hospitality that said, "I'm going to regret this, but come on in anyway." "Good afternoon, Jennifer. Everything all right?"
She skipped the small talk.
"The board had an emergency meeting last night. About your gate." Mike blinked. "My gate? You've blocked the path to the lake," she said, tapping her pearl-adorned wrist like it was a gavel. "That path's been used for decades by the community. You can't just claim it." Mike tried to keep the engineer in him calm. "Actually, I can. It's on my deed. I had the property surveyed before I bought it. No easement. No right-of-way. It's private land." Jennifer's smile curled in that way villains do in Disney movies. "Well, the board voted unanimously. You need to give us a key to the gate. Homeowners are complaining they have to walk 10 extra minutes." 10 minutes. Mike raised an eyebrow. "To walk around the block?" She leaned in. "People are upset. And when people get upset, the HOA gets involved." It wasn't a threat. Not yet. But it felt like the kind of sentence that should come with dramatic lighting and ominous cello music. "Jennifer," Mike said, his tone tightening, "I'm happy to be a good neighbor, but this isn't a shortcut. It's my backyard." Her eyes narrowed. Section 7 of our bylaws states. Section 7 covers community property. Mike cut in. "This isn't community property. It's mine." And then came the sentence that would echo in Mike's head for months. "The board has ways of making things very uncomfortable for difficult homeowners." He wanted to laugh, but there was something in her voice that made him straighten. Something cold and practiced. Jennifer didn't knock on doors to chat. She came to conquer. "I think we're done here," he said, handing her a card. "If you need to discuss this further, talk to my attorney." He closed the door softly, almost too softly, like he didn't want to provoke her, but through the window, he saw her storm off, phone already to her ear, heels clicking like warning shots on the walkway. Mike stared at the gate through the blinds. One gate, one lock, one determined HOA president. And somehow, it felt like the start of something far bigger than a neighborhood squabble. In his gut, he knew This wasn't just about access to the lake. It was a line in the sand, and Jennifer Wilson had just declared war. Mike Harris had always thought of the HOA as an annoying but ultimately harmless presence, like a mosquito in khakis. But by Friday morning, that illusion was gone.
Dead. Buried.
Shoved in a mailbox that was now, apparently, the wrong shade of blue. The first violation notice arrived at dawn. It was taped to his front door like a scarlet letter. Non-compliant mailbox color. Not approved in Section 3B. Mike stared at it, half awake, coffee in hand, wondering if he'd sleepwalked into a Twilight Zone episode where suburban color palettes were policed like national security threats. By noon, another citation appeared, this time for his garden border. Unapproved edging material. It was brick.
Brick.
The same bricks used by 3 other houses on his street, all of which had mysteriously escaped HOA scrutiny. By the weekend, the violations hit 5. His shrubs were over regulation height. His mailbox had an unauthorized flag holder. And his lawn, freshly mowed and as ordinary as toast, was non-uniform in blade consistency. That one actually made him laugh, then immediately scared him because it was printed on official HOA letterhead. Mike was no fool. He knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't about gates or hedges. This was retaliation. Punishment for saying no to the self-appointed queen of Maple Springs, Jennifer Wilson. And Jennifer wasn't acting alone. Saturday night, just after 11:30 p.m., Mike was reviewing code on his laptop when his phone buzzed, a notification from his security system. Motion detected. Back gate. He clicked the alert. The feed flickered, then came into focus, and what he saw stopped his breath cold. 3 figures stood at his gate, hooded, fumbling with something metallic. Mike leaned in. The glare of the infrared light bounced off something long, silver, and unmistakable. Bolt cutters. Jennifer Wilson, Robert Dean, HOA treasurer, and Michael Thompson, the HOA's glorified facilities manager, who didn't know a wrench from a weed eater. Mike hit record on the app and grabbed his phone. 911, what's your emergency? My property's being broken into, he said. I have it on camera, 3 individuals, one with bolt cutters. His hands trembled as he raced downstairs, heart pounding like war drums. It wasn't fear. It was fury. A kind of betrayal that crawled under your skin and made you want to grab the law by its lapels. Minutes later, the doorbell rang. A uniformed officer, tall, calm, flashlight in hand, stood outside. Officer James, you reported trespassers? Mike nodded and showed him the live camera feed. That's them. Jennifer Wilson and 2 HOA members. Trying to break my lock. The officer's expression tightened. Let's take a look. They circled around to the back gate. The bolt cutters were gone, but the lock bore deep gouges. Scratch marks glinted under the flashlight. Footprints, fresh and unmistakable, pressed into the soft soil. This is attempted breaking and entering, Officer James said, pulling out his notepad. We'll file a report. Just as he was finishing, headlights cut across the yard. A silver SUV rolled in like a bad omen. Out stepped Jennifer and Robert, faces as smug as ever. Officer, Jennifer said sweetly, we were just checking on community property. This homeowner is blocking a shared access path. This is private property, ma'am, Officer James interrupted. You were recorded attempting to damage a lock. After hours. Without permission. Jennifer's smile faltered. We have bylaws, she snapped. And I have state law, Officer James replied coolly. I suggest you consult an attorney before this becomes criminal trespassing. They left, muttering, but not defeated. Mike stood at the edge of his yard, the gate behind him, the broken lock in front of him, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel crazy. He felt watched, targeted, but not alone. Something had shifted. This wasn't petty politics anymore. This was war. Mike Harris had been gone for less than 2 hours, just a quick trip to the grocery store to buy eggs, batteries, and a frozen lasagna he would later burn out of spite. When he pulled into his driveway, balancing 2 bags and a carton of oat milk, he expected peace. What he found instead made him drop a bag on the ground. His gate, was locked with a shiny, unfamiliar padlock. A laminated sign flapped in the breeze, taped to the post like some smug little declaration of war. Community access restored. Contact HOA office for your key. Mike stood there in disbelief, cereal melting in the sun, a bag of carrots slowly rolling down the path. They had actually done it. They'd broken in, changed the lock, posted a note, like it was a routine maintenance update instead of blatant criminal trespassing. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking, not with fear this time, but pure, white-hot, "What the hell is wrong with you people" rage. 911, what's your emergency? They did it again, he said, voice tight. The HOA. They broke my lock, replaced it, and claimed the property as public. An hour later, Officer Reynolds arrived. Different guy, same baffled expression as he examined the scene. He snapped photos of the new lock, the note, and the mangled remains of Mike's original one that now lay in the grass like a corpse. "This is vandalism," the officer said plainly. "And criminal trespass. You want to press charges?" Mike didn't hesitate.
Yes.
"I do. And I want a restraining order." He didn't realize he had company until a soft voice floated down the path. "I saw them, you know." He turned to see Grace Mitchell, the elderly woman from 3 doors down, approaching slowly in a wide-brimmed straw hat and a faded floral blouse. She walked like her bones carried stories. "They came around noon," she said. "Jennifer. That Robert man. And that handyman she hires who always smells like gasoline and arrogance." Mike blinked. "You saw them?" "I filmed them," she said with a satisfied nod. "My bird camera caught everything. Motion activated. Picks up Jays, Cardinals, and apparently HOA thugs." Grace reached into her tote bag and pulled out a USB stick like it was a holy relic. "You can give this to the officer." Officer Reynolds lit up. "This will help your case tremendously." "I'm tired of their bullying," Grace muttered. "They threatened to fine me last month because of my bird bath." Mike raised an eyebrow. "Your bird bath?" "I've had it for 23 years, she said, her lips tightening. "Apparently, it's not aesthetically consistent with HOA landscaping guidelines. Whatever that means." Mike couldn't help it. He laughed, then caught himself. "I'm sorry. This is insane." Grace's eyes twinkled behind her glasses.
No, dear.
"This is Maple Springs." As the officer took her statement, Mike felt something he hadn't felt in days, relief. Not because the fight was over. Far from it. But because he had an ally. An unlikely one, perhaps, but loyal, sharp, and fearless in her own quiet way. Jennifer had the bylaws. Mike had the law.
And now?
He had Grace. That night, he downloaded the video footage, labeled it Exhibit A, and sent it straight to his lawyer. Then, he sat on his back porch, watching the lake shimmer in the moonlight beyond the gate. One lock broken, another replaced, but something stronger was forming, something Jennifer Wilson couldn't cut through with bolt cutters. A resistance. By the time Mike Harris sat across from attorney Daniel Brooks in his sunlit downtown office, the adrenaline had dulled, but the anger hadn't. Mike placed a thick folder on the table like it weighed 50 pounds. Inside, photos, survey maps, time-stamped footage, violation letters, and Grace Mitchell's video testimony starring Jennifer Wilson wielding bolt cutters like suburban Excalibur. Daniel, a no-nonsense civil litigator with a reputation for chess, not checkers, legal work, flipped through the contents with the kind of focused expression that made Mike feel both hopeful and terrified. "HOAs don't scare me," Daniel finally said, snapping the folder shut. "Bullies with bylaw books are still bullies. We file for civil harassment and damages. The lock incident alone is enough for a restraining order. But the retaliation pattern? That's where it gets juicy." Mike exhaled. "Let's do it." The paperwork was filed that same week. The HOA, in classic Maple Springs fashion, responded not with grace, but with fire. They called an emergency community meeting at the clubhouse. No agenda, no details. Just cryptic flyers posted around the neighborhood with bold red letters. "Protect our access. Attend tonight. 7 p.m. Homeowners only. It felt like a rally, a war drum, a trap. Mike wasn't going to walk into it blind. He showed up with Daniel by his side, the folder in his hand, and a printed copy of his deed sticking out like a sword in a scabbard. The clubhouse was packed. Jennifer stood at the podium in full power pose mode, her voice as slick as lacquered hardwood. We are here because one homeowner has decided to place personal interests above community unity. She never finished the sentence. The double doors burst open. Officer Reynolds stepped in, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies. The air turned to static. Jennifer Wilson, Robert Dean, Michael Thompson, he called out evenly, "We need to speak with you regarding a criminal investigation."
Gasps.
Whispers. Jennifer turned pale. Robert looked like someone unplugged his soul, and Michael dropped his water bottle with a loud thud. The room descended into chaos. Mike stood still, his eyes scanning the crowd, when he noticed him. David Palmer, vice president of the HOA. Usually quiet, always overshadowed by Jennifer's diva energy. Tonight he looked different. Nervous.
Sweaty.
Restless. As Jennifer was led outside, still pretending this was all a misunderstanding, David edged toward Mike. "Hey," he muttered under his breath. "You don't know me, but just take this." He slipped a USB drive into Mike's palm like a drug deal in reverse. "I shouldn't be doing this," David added. "But it's all in there. Emails. Contracts. Meeting notes Jennifer kept off the record." Mike stared at him. "What is this?" David swallowed hard. "She's not just harassing you. She's been working with Walsh Development. The gate thing, it's a test run. They want every property with lake access. She promised them she'd make it happen." And just like that, David disappeared into the crowd, leaving Mike with a plastic sliver of truth and a gut full of fire. Later that night, back at home, Mike opened the files. The emails were damning. Jennifer had coordinated with a local developer, Walsh Development, discussing which homeowners were vulnerable, which properties could be rezoned quietly, and how to pressure owners into giving up their lakefronts using fines, legal traps, and HOA rule enforcement. Mike's name was on the list. Top of the list. Next to it, difficult. Watch mailbox. Escalate violations. For sale. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't about his gate. It was about control. And now, with this drive in hand, Mike wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was holding the match that could burn the whole crooked empire down. Mike Harris had always believed the war started with the gate. But that belief shattered the moment he opened the last folder on the USB. It wasn't just emails anymore. It was a hit list. Dozens of names, homeowners with lake access, retirees, single moms, young families, each labeled with tags like targeted, needs pressure, lean potential. Some names were circled. Others were crossed out. But only one name was underlined. In red ink, Mike Harris. Next to it, in Jennifer Wilson's loopy cursive, a note. Engineer. Problematic. Uses legal language. Push harder. Watch mailbox. Build history. Goal. Force sale W/in 18 months. Mike's jaw clenched. This wasn't policy. This wasn't community management. This was a deliberate campaign, a personal vendetta disguised as procedure. He scrolled further through the folder labeled Partnerships. Buried between HOA meeting summaries and spreadsheets full of projected acquisition timelines sat the real smoking gun, a thread of emails between Jennifer and Walsh Development, a real estate firm known for buying up waterfront properties and turning them into luxury townhomes. In one message, Jennifer bragged, "Once Harris caves, it sets precedent. We'll push the next 3. Surveyor has been cooperative. City council votes next quarter. Keep pressure on." Another response from someone with the Walsh Development email. "Appreciate your persistence. HOA's help has been instrumental. We'll begin architect mock-ups once lakefront parcels secured. Don't worry, we'll take care of the messy ones." Mike couldn't breathe for a moment. They weren't just trying to access the path. They were trying to eliminate him, financially, socially, even professionally. Because that was the next folder. External leverage. He clicked it open, and his heart stopped. There it was. An email from Jennifer to someone named Charles Whitman, her husband's golfing buddy and, not coincidentally, Mike's boss at the tech firm he worked for. Subject line: Concern Re. Mike Harris. HOA complaint. The email was written like a whisper in HR's ear. Carefully worded. Sinister in its vagueness. It referenced concerning behavior, hostile interactions with neighbors, and an increasingly unstable pattern of boundary aggression. She even offered to chat by phone to provide context off the record. It had been sent 3 weeks before the first violation letter. Before the gate. Before the war had even begun. Mike sat back in his chair, reeling. Last quarter, he'd lost out on a promotion, a major one. His project lead role had been reevaluated and handed to someone less qualified. At the time, he'd assumed it was politics, bad timing, or just corporate roulette. Now he knew better. Jennifer had poisoned the well, not just in his yard, but in his entire life. And somehow, she made it look clean, lawful, concerned. Like a good citizen doing her duty to flag a troubled man. Mike wasn't just a target. He was the test case. The first domino. The guinea pig in a larger plan to bulldoze the soul out of Cedar Lake and replace it with glossy condos and HOA-approved water features. He printed every file, made copies, stored backups in the cloud, on hard drives, and in a folder marked, just in case I get run over. When he met with his lawyer Daniel the next morning, he didn't ask if they had a case anymore. He asked, "How fast can we bury her?" Daniel looked over the stack of documents and gave a half smile. Faster than she thought. Mike wasn't in the dark anymore. Now he had light and fire. And Jennifer Wilson had just made her worst mistake. She put her name on the bullet. On a sticky summer evening, while most of Cedar Lake settled into dinner and backyard sprinklers, something far more sinister was brewing at the Maple Springs Community Center. The sign on the clubhouse door was printed in bold red letters. Emergency HOA meeting. Homeowners in good standing only. Translation: No Mike Harris. The meeting wasn't public. No email alert. No HOA app notification. Just whispers, flyers on select doors, and a few too many knowing glances across front lawns. But HOA President Jennifer Wilson had underestimated two things: Grace Mitchell's hearing and her loyalty. At exactly 5:47 p.m., Mike's phone rang. "They're planning a vote tonight," Grace whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "They're putting a lien on your house. Something about $115,000 in accumulated violations going back 3 years. Mike nearly dropped his phone. "That's impossible. I didn't even live here 3 years ago." "Doesn't matter," Grace said. "They've got graphs.
Charts.
Fake records." Mary from book club said Jennifer called it a historic pattern of noncompliance. "You need to be here.
Now."
By 6:30 p.m., Mike was in his car, flying down Cedar Lane. In the passenger seat, his lawyer, Daniel Brooks, flipping through a folder like a surgeon preparing for trauma. In the back seat, Officer Reynolds, off-duty but fully uniformed, just in case, he'd said grimly when Mike called him. At 6:58 p.m., they entered the community center like a legal SWAT team. The room froze. Jennifer stood at the front of the hall, mid-presentation, a projector behind her showing an enlarged photo of Mike's gate with angry red arrows drawn around it. Beside her, Robert Dean clutched a clipboard of what looked suspiciously like fabricated financial records. The rest of the room, a sea of neighbors, some curious, some confused, some visibly hostile, turned to stare. Jennifer's mouth hung open. "This is a private meeting," she snapped. "Only homeowners in good standing are permitted." Mike didn't flinch. "I am a homeowner. And these men are my legal counsel and a law enforcement officer investigating your actions. So, unless you'd like to call the sheriff to remove yourself, I suggest you sit down."
Gasps.
Jennifer sputtered. "This is an emergency session. Special circumstances. Which still require 14 days notice under your own bylaws." Daniel cut in. "We have them printed. Would you like to read aloud the section you're violating?" Reynolds cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I'm here as a courtesy. but also under directive to collect statements regarding criminal trespass, vandalism, and suspected document falsification related to this HOA board. The room was dead silent. Mike stepped up to the front, opened his folder, and laid it all bare. Property maps showing his land included the lake path, surveillance footage of Jennifer and the gang with bolt cutters, USB printouts with Jennifer's own handwritten notes plotting his financial ruin, affidavits from neighbors, including Grace, swearing they'd been coerced or fined unfairly. And finally, the kicker. A copy of a letter from Jennifer to Mike's boss, filled with baseless accusations that cost him a major promotion. This, Mike said, holding the letter high, is what this meeting is really about. You're not protecting community interests. You're weaponizing power to bully homeowners off their land. For a moment, Jennifer didn't speak, but her face told the story. Pale, trembling, eyes darting from neighbor to neighbor, watching the tide turn. Then, like a dam breaking, voices rose from the crowd. Wait, you told us that Path was HOA property. I paid extra dues for his land. You said he was unstable. Grace stood up, steady and strong. And you tried to take my home over a bird bath. Reynolds moved in. Jennifer Wilson, we'll need to speak with you outside. Robert dropped his clipboard. Jennifer tried to maintain composure, but her voice cracked as she muttered, "This isn't over." "Oh," Mike said quietly as she was let out, "I think it just might be." The clubhouse erupted, not into chaos, but awakening. For the first time, the HOA's spell had been broken, and the whole neighborhood was finally wide awake. The next morning, the Maple Springs Community Center felt different. No longer a courtroom of whispers and stares, it buzzed with the quiet hum of reckoning. Jennifer Wilson was gone, hauled out in front of half the neighborhood, her perfect pearls jangling with every step. And in the silence that followed her exit, something else began to rise. Voices. The ones that had been silenced for years. Mike didn't expect what happened next. He had come back to the community center to drop off a final packet of documents to the interim administrator. But what he found was a room full of folding chairs, occupied by neighbors who had once avoided eye contact, and were now waiting to talk. Not to him, to each other. "Is it true?" a woman near the back asked quietly, "that the HOA was charging us to maintain his path?" Heads turned, eyes shifted, and then came the moment that cracked it all wide open. Thomas Glenn stood up. No one had ever paid Thomas much attention. The soft-spoken accountant with his pleated khakis and giant binder rarely said more than "nice weather today." But now, he stepped forward with quiet conviction and opened his spreadsheet like a preacher opening scripture. For the past 2 years, Thomas began, HOA dues were increased by $50 per household. The justification listed in the report was enhanced lakefront maintenance. But there's never been a work order. Not a fate. And the only place that got maintained was Mike's path. A collective murmur rippled across the room. That gate was never HOA property, Thomas continued. The board knew that. I told them. They ignored it. Another man stood up, an older resident with paint-stained jeans and a faded polo. They fined me $200 for leaving my trash can out overnight. One night, my daughter was in the hospital. A woman followed. I got denied for a fence 3 times. Then they approved the exact same design when I hired Jennifer's brother's construction company. A younger couple chimed in, nearly in sync. We were told we had to repaint our shutters to match community tone. The only color approved was the one Jennifer's sister-in-law sells. Mike sat there, stunned. The stories tumbled out like a broken dam, each tale darker, more outrageous than the last. Some were petty. Some were financially devastating. All were variations on the same theme, abuse of power hiding behind policy. Grace Mitchell, seated in her usual garden hat, smiled softly. I tried to speak up once. They threatened to revoke my voting rights for being non-compliant. I let it go. But we all let it go, Thomas said gently. Until now. The interim administrator, who had been standing quietly near the entrance, finally stepped forward. This HOA will be audited, he said, voice firm. All violation notices from the past 3 years will be reviewed. Vendor contracts. Financial records. If there's fraud, it will be exposed. If there's abuse, it ends now. Applause broke out. Not wild or raucous, but steady, like thunder rolling in the distance. Mike looked around the room. Neighbors he barely knew yesterday now nodded at him with respect. Solidarity. He didn't start this war, but somehow he had become the face of it. And now he wasn't alone. As people filtered out, Grace squeezed Mike's hand. You know, she said with a wink, the best part about surviving a storm isn't just that it clears. It's seeing who stands beside you when the skies break open. Mike smiled. For the first time in months, his jaw didn't feel tight. His chest didn't feel heavy. His gait was still there, battered, sure, but intact. And on the other side, an entire community ready to fight back. The courtroom smelled like old paper and polished wood, clean, sterile, deceptively calm. But beneath the surface, you could feel it, the buzz of tension, the weight of consequences hanging in the air like a storm that had waited far too long to break. Mike Harris sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly in his lap. To his right, Attorney Daniel Brooks sorted through a stack of exhibits with a surgeon's focus. To his left, Grace Mitchell sat quietly, her worn leather notebook in hand, filled with 5 years' worth of HOA meeting notes. She had insisted on coming. For closure, she'd said. Mike suspected it was for something more, for every homeowner who had ever been silenced. Across the aisle sat Jennifer Wilson, still defiant in her designer blazer and flawless hair, flanked by Robert Dean and Diane Carlisle, the HOA's treasurer and compliance officer. If they were nervous, they didn't show it. Jennifer even smiled, faintly, the way a cornered animal might. But her smile vanished when the judge entered. Court is now in session. What followed wasn't loud. There were no dramatic outbursts or gasps. This wasn't a TV show. But what unfolded was surgical. Daniel began calmly, professionally. And then, with the first slide of his presentation, he dropped the hammer. Your Honor, we submit evidence of financial misconduct within the Maple Springs HOA, specifically $127,000 in disbursements made to a company called Lakeside Maintenance LLC over the past 2 fiscal years. The judge raised an eyebrow. And this company provides what services? Daniel clicked to the next slide. According to HOA meeting minutes, none. The company has no employees, no website, no contractor's license. It is by every legal and business metric a shell. He turned slowly toward the defendants. Bank records obtained via subpoena show that the account registered under Lakeside Maintenance LLC was directly linked to an account owned by Jennifer Wilson. The room didn't gasp, but it held its breath. Daniel continued, voice as steady as a metronome. We further present text messages and internal emails that indicate coordination between Jennifer Wilson, Robert Dean, and Diane Carlisle in processing these payments, fabricating work orders, and disguising the disbursements as lakefront maintenance, a cost borne by homeowners, with no actual services rendered. Jennifer's face turned ashen. Robert adjusted his tie so tightly he looked like he was trying to strangle himself. Diane stared at the floor. The judge leaned forward. Do you have anything to say, Ms. Wilson? Jennifer opened her mouth, but her attorney shot her a quick look and shook his head. She said nothing. The judge nodded. Based on the evidence submitted, this court finds sufficient grounds for criminal charges including fraud, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners under California Civil Code Section 1365.6 and related statutes. He turned to the bailiff. Please take the defendants into custody pending arraignment. Mike didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just watched in silence as the bailiff stepped forward, pulled out the handcuffs, and one by one, locked Jennifer, Robert, and Diane in cold, metallic bracelets. Jennifer finally looked at Mike, eyes blazing. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice shaking. Mike stared back, calm as the lake behind his house. Oh, he said softly. I think it is. The courtroom doors swung shut behind them, echoing like a gavel. As the room emptied, Thomas Glenn approached, holding a fresh audit report. We found more, he said. Fake vendors.
kickbacks, even bribes.
This is just the beginning. Mike took the paper, but his eyes drifted to the door Jennifer had just disappeared through. No more fake fines. No more threats. And no more HOA tyrants hiding behind bylaws. This wasn't just a legal win. It was liberation. And the community of Maple Springs had finally taken its first step toward healing. A month after Jennifer Wilson's dramatic arrest, the Maple Springs Community Center looked and felt like a different world. Gone were the hushed tones, the stiff chairs arranged in tight rows like soldiers awaiting commands. The room had been rearranged into a circle. Sunlight streamed through open windows. Freshly brewed coffee sat in a thermos by the entrance, next to a plate of still warm muffins. Grace Mitchell's muffins, of course. Mike sat in the back, watching it unfold. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fancy. But what was happening that day was nothing short of a miracle. Maple Springs was electing a new HOA board. There were no secret ballots this time. No last-minute flyers shoved under doors. No whispered campaigns or veiled threats. Just neighbors, regular people, standing up and saying, "I want to help." When someone nominated Grace Mitchell for president, the entire room broke into spontaneous applause. She stood slowly, a bit wobbly in her garden sandals, clutching her ever-present leather notebook. "I'm no politician," she said with a humble smile. "I don't know every code, and I sure can't tell you which shade of beige our mailboxes are supposed to be. But I do know what fairness looks like." The letter arrived on a Thursday, tucked neatly in Mike Harris's mailbox between an electric bill and a pizza coupon. It was hand-addressed. No HOA letterhead, no threats, no legalese. Just his name, written in careful cursive. Inside was a simple thank you card. White, modest, lined in gold. But it wasn't the design that struck him. It was the message. Some people close gates. Others open doors for an entire community. Thank you for being the second kind. Your grateful neighbors. Mike stared at the words for a long time. He had never set out to be anyone's hero. All he wanted was to enjoy a quiet home, a slice of lake, and maybe, on good days, a nap in his hammock without stepping on someone's forgotten beer can.
But now?
Now he was something else, a symbol of how a single homeowner could push back and pull an entire neighborhood forward. That same afternoon, he got another letter, this one less sentimental, more serious. The return address read, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Inside, a request to assist in an ongoing investigation into municipal zoning irregularities, specifically involving Walsh Development and its connections to local officials. His testimony, his documents, especially the emails from Jennifer Wilson, had cracked open more than just an HOA conspiracy. They'd started unearthing something deeper. "They want to meet in person," Mike told Grace over coffee the next morning. She stirred her tea with a knowing look. "I always said your gate was more than just metal and hinges." Outside, something extraordinary was happening. Construction had begun on the new community lake access, not the stolen, repurposed path Jennifer once tried to control, but a legally approved, beautifully designed walkway. Grace chaired the project. Thomas handled the budget. Local families helped pick the design. It would include benches, a kayak launch, and a shaded picnic area, built not through manipulation, but with consent, contribution, and care. Mike had walked by it every day, quietly watching as a new part of the community bloomed, one that was no longer guarded by fear or patrolled by power trips in polo shirts. That evening, as the sun sank low over Cedar Lake, casting amber light across the water, Mike walked out to his gate. He paused there, hand resting on the latch. The gate had become something of a legend, a symbol, the spot where it all began, and where it could have ended if he hadn't stood his ground. Its lock was newer now. The sign had been updated. Private property.
Protected by law.
Open to justice. He opened the gate slowly, stepped through, and looked out at the lake. Children laughed across the water. Neighbors paddled in canoes. And in the distance, construction crews poured the foundation for a public dock, the kind done right. No secrets. No schemes. Just shared space, shared hope. Then, Mike stepped back, closed the gate gently and latched it, not out of fear, not to keep anyone out, but to remind himself, boundaries matter. So does vigilance. Because the world always needs someone to protect the line between what's fair and what's easy to abuse. From behind, he heard footsteps. Grace, holding a tray of muffins and a clipboard. "Board meeting at 7, she said. "Don't be late. You're still on the landscaping review committee." Mike laughed. "I fought a war to avoid that." Grace winked. "You won, which means you get to do the boring stuff now." As they walked back toward the house, Mike took one last glance at the gate. It hadn't changed, but he had. So had the neighborhood. From fractured to united. From manipulated to empowered. From fearful to free. And in a world full of closed doors, Mike Harris had become the man who showed his neighbors how to build their own keys. The gate had done its job. And the community had opened wide.